This is the Quadro NVS 315, a mid-range Nvidia card from 2013. It was never intended for gaming or overclocking, and today we're going to be doing both of those. It wasn't as bad as I expected, and for only $3, I'm not sure I can call it a bad deal. But what is this card anyway? Well, the NVS series is a part of the professional Quadro series and was meant for business workstations like financial traders with multi-display setups. The 315 in particular came out in March of 2013. It was the second to last NVS card ever released. Unfortunately, Nvidia ended support for these cards in 2021, and with no sign of return, these cards are truly a thing of the past. Nowadays, these cards go for about $10 on eBay, but I got mine for only $3 from a lot of 30 graphics cards I paid $90 for. This card doesn't look like it's in that bad of a condition, but because we're going to be overclocking, I'm still going to take it apart and replace the thermal paste. The 315 debuted with a price tag of $160, and although Nvidia doesn't officially support NVS cards, they're still listed on their website. I don't know why a GPU that now goes for $10 is anywhere on a billion-dollar company's website, but I guess they know better than I do. Also, the NVS 810 has 2 GPUs and 8 video ports. That is ridiculous, and I want one. This fan connector is impossible to get out. Oh my god. Oh, there we go. Finally, the heatsink's off. It only had 4 screws holding it down, so that didn't take very long. Anyways, our decade-old 315 used the GF199 graphics processor of the 825A1 variant built on TSMC's 40nm process in the Fermi 2.0 architecture. It's a relatively small chip and has a die area of only 79mm squared with 292 million transistors packed inside. It features 84 shading units, 8 texture mapping units, 4 render output units, a gigabyte of DDR3 with a 64-bit bus width, a GPU core clock of 523 MHz, and a memory clock of 875. So the card isn't very powerful, but it does support basic DirectX 12 and has a TDP of 19 watts, meaning you can throw it into just about any system. And there's the bracket off. Let's just clean up this IHS a little bit. Alright, and that's the heatsink all taken apart. I'm gonna go run it under some water. Unfortunately, our card also uses DMS59. I say unfortunately because it's old and requires an adapter, but it was actually a pretty useful technology that used a single video port to output 2 DVI or VGA connections. But as of December of 2020, the adapter cable was listed as obsolete by its primary vendor, Molex, and has long since been relevant. Alright, and that's the card all back together. Let's throw it into the system. The test system we're going to be using has an i3-4130, 16GB of RAM, and Windows 7 running on a SSD. We just gotta take the card, stick it in there, like plug in the DMS59 cable, plug in our DVI splitter cable, plug in the DVI to HDMI cable, plug in the DVI to capture card cable, and we're good to go. Now, because this is a Quadro graphics card, I didn't expect to be able to overclock it, but after installing the drivers, Nvidia Inspector and MSI Afterburner both provided the option to. The highest I was able to get the core was 700 MHz, the shader at 1400 MHz, and the memory maxed out at 1050 MHz. I also changed everything to high performance in the Nvidia control panel, but even with all this tuning, I didn't have high hopes for it. Also, leave a like, comment, or consider subscribing because YouTube has yet to pay me and I need money to afford old graphics cards. Thanks. Now, I tested 8 different games, but I think GTA 5 is pretty representative of the whole. I ran it with the lowest settings and a resolution of 800 by 600, and it actually managed to get 28 FPS. Now, I don't want to be the moron that calls 28 FPS playable, especially in this resolution, but it kinda was. It was a genuinely smooth experience, and it didn't crash, stutter, or really show any signs of imperfection. If you gave this system to 9-year-old me back when I was using a Centrino, I gladly would have accepted and probably would have played through the whole game. But not all tests went this relatively well. CSGO, for example, was horrendous. I ran it with the lowest settings in 720p and it was completely unplayable. The game would freeze every couple of seconds, and although I'd estimate the average frame rate to be at about 25, it was essentially stuttery garbage. CSGO was not a hard game to run by any stretch of the imagination, and I also tried reverting to the default clock speeds, but this didn't fix the issue. And considering how well GTA 5 ran in comparison, I don't really know why this test went so poorly. The next game I played was Rocket League. I ran it with the high performance, aka lowest settings, and the glorious resolution of 640 by 480. I ended up getting an average of 55 FPS, and I probably could have upped the settings or resolution a bit, but I felt like this was on brand for the NVS experience. And even with these graphical sacrifices, I was able to score even though the ball was nearly impossible to see sometimes. So technically, you can play Rocket League on the NVS 315. But even with the arguable success of Rocket League, I still decided to run the next game, Insurgency, in 720p with the the lowest settings. It got an average frame rate of 48 FPS, and I destroyed the enemy team, even though they're just bots. But the frame rate was high enough and stable throughout, so you could definitely use this in a competitive environment, although I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. So far, all the tests I did had been in a sub 1080p resolution, and I was determined to run it by any means necessary. So I turned everything down as far as possible, and luckily was able to hit that 30 FPS mark with an average in-game frame rate of 31. I mean, it wasn't bad, but if I was planning to play through it, I think 900 or 720p would definitely be the way to go. Also in 720p was Fallout New Vegas. Surprisingly, when it auto-detected the card, it opted to use the high settings, but only got about 20 FPS. So I turned down everything to the lowest settings, restarted the game, and the frame rate over doubled with an average of 45. Considering the age of this game and that it came out 3 years before this card did, it was still a little disappointing. But the 315 doesn't have a lot to work with, and you're not supposed to game on it, so I guess it's better than nothing. Beamng.Drive, however, went about as bad as I expected. I loaded up the East Coast map, threw on the lowest settings, and at a resolution of 640 by 480 got an average frame rate of 17. Obviously, that's really bad, but it was still kinda better than I expected. I mean, yeah, the UI took up most of the screen, and there's hardly a concept of speed at such a low frame rate, but at least the game was able to start, which is already a lot better than a lot of cards I've tested. But since Beamng.Drive is a newer game, it's not really fair, so I decided to run an older one, Left 4 Dead 2. This was one of the other few games that I was able to run in 1080p, and with the lowest settings achieved an average frame rate of 31 FPS. Now, that's not great, but considering the resolution, I can't quite call it bad. The last game I ran was also an older one, Half-Life 2. I ran it in 1080p with the low settings, but it only got 53 FPS, which was kind of a letdown. It was mostly a smooth, responsive experience, but it was very prone to slowing down when these flying robot drone things exploded and caused the frame rate to halve for a few seconds. The last card I tested Half-Life 2 with also did not run amazingly, and I think this game might be a little harder to run than most people expect. Well, at least on very old cards, but it still could have been better. So overall, this card isn't good by any means, but it's nowhere near as bad as I thought it would be. I came in expecting Intel GMA levels of performance, and the fact that it was actually able to playably run some games in 1080p is good enough for me. Also, the card stayed cool throughout testing. I was overclocking, which you're not supposed to do, and running games on it, which you're also not supposed to do, but it still stayed cool. I mean, that's obviously due to it having a very low TDP, but I'm still a bit impressed. So, should you buy this card? No. If you have a budget of $10 for a GPU, you've probably got more important problems. But it was interesting seeing how far I could push the overclocks and how it holds up well outside of its intended environments. Either way, I hope you enjoyed the video. Consider leaving a like or subscribing because it genuinely helps me out. If you want to join the community, there's a link to the official J9 Discord server in the description, alongside a few donation methods that directly support the channel. If you have any questions or related comments, then leave them below and I'll be sure to respond to them. That's about it. Have a great day. Bye.